Pear Deck as you join the call. All right, here we go. So we're going to start our session today. It's part one of Implicit Biases and Colorism, led by yours truly, Courtney DeAnda. My pronouns are she, her. And our objective today is that staff will be able to understand that implicit bias, often in the form of colorism, is pervasive and must be examined if we are to serve students of all skin tones equally, of all skin colors equally well. All right. Before we start our session today, I do want to do a land acknowledgement, just that I am presenting here in Denver and I am on Ute and Arapaho land. If you're interested to see whose land you occupy, the map is in here as well, and you can access that later. I'll give you that resource. Here's our agenda for today. And I do want to name that today's session is going to feel super fast, but it's because we only have 30 minutes. But know that we'll come together to do part two next time. All right, I want you to go ahead and read our mindset at your own pace. And when you're done, drag your dot in Pear Deck to I agree. All right, wonderful. I see everyone has responded, so we're going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Go ahead and take a moment to read the 4 agreements, and if there's anything you'd like to add to those norms, go ahead and write it in Pear Deck. I also want to note we are doing this virtually, so I added in the tech agreements as well. So if you have anything you'd like to add to our norms, go ahead and write that in the Pear Deck. Awesome. Thanks to those of you who added some norms. I really like that one, Rachel, embrace discomfort. There might be some spaces where you feel uncomfortable in this session, and embrace that discomfort. Sit with that discomfort. And we'll talk more about that in another session as well. Yes, be present. I appreciate that one as well. I love this one. Beautiful. All right. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for acknowledging our norms and our mindset, and for adding in those other ones as well. So I'm not going to take questions during this session, but there is a parking lot for questions. So at the end of the session, you will complete this mastery check. There's a space to ask questions. You can go through and complete it as we go through the session if you prefer, especially if you don't feel comfortable using Pear Deck. Those answers will show anonymously on the screen, but if you're not comfortable with that, you can answer the questions directly in the mastery check. But there is also a spot to ask questions. Also, feel free to use the raise hand icon in Teams if you would like to volunteer to read a slide. There will be lots of opportunities for you to read so that I'm not talking at you this whole time. All right, we're going to take around 10 minutes. It probably won't take that full time to take this test. So I'm going to drop this link in the chat. If you have any issues with this, please message me directly. I don't want you writing in the chat so that we can minimize distractions. So I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes. And if you're not done at that 10 minutes, we are going to go ahead and move on for time's sake. But if you finish before that, let me know by dragging your dot to the I'm done right here on the slide, and we will move on after 10 minutes. All right, I see all of you have dragged your dot, so I know that you're done. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on. So in the pear deck, I want you to respond about your results. Here's the general results for the race implicit bias test and the skin tone implicit bias test. Are you surprised? Are you concerned? Are you confused? How do you feel about your do now results? Remember, these are going to pop up anonymously on the screen. If you don't feel comfortable with your answer being shared, you can write it directly in your mastery check. Thank you all for sharing. These are awesome responses. I appreciate your vulnerability. Take about 10 seconds to wrap up what you're saying. All right, we're going to move on to the next slide. Again, thank you all for your responses and your vulnerability in sharing. Awesome. Okay, so implicit bias. Most of you shared a lot of these things that we're gonna stamp right now. What is it and why does it matter? Do I have a volunteer who'd like to read out that first bullet point about what is it? Thank you, Emily. Thank you. Laura, will you read the next one? Why does it matter? Thank you. That's the key right there. All of us have biases, and it's harmful to pretend like we don't have them. Some important notes. I anticipated some of the questions you might have had after your do now. I'm going to let you take a moment to read some of these if you have questions about the accuracy of the implicit bias test, or what it means if you got a result that says you don't have any preference, or if you have a preference toward African American people, or preference toward light-skinned or Caucasian people. Find the area where you might have a question and read that response. Read that important note. Take about 15 seconds. Okay, hopefully that addressed your questions, and if you have more questions, feel free to drop them in the parking lot. All right, the key here though is to remember having biases is not necessarily problematic because we all have them, but refusing to acknowledge and not working to overcome our biases, that's where it's problematic. It's our duty to, as people who work with students of color, it's our duty to actively work on our implicit biases and saying either out loud or in our heads that we're not biased or that our biases don't affect how we show up in our classroom is the antithesis of doing the work. We say this all the time, that we have to do the work, and this is really what it's all about. All right, we're going to dig in specifically to colorism. So colorism, what is it? Rachel, will you read that first bullet point for us, please? Awesome, yes. Thank you. And end quotes right there. I missed that. Okay. I pulled a clipping from an article in Time magazine. I want you to take a moment to read that on your own and drag your dot so that I know you finished reading those 2 paragraphs. Beautiful. It looks like all of you have finished reading, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next one. So the biggest thing, the biggest area of confusion is racism versus colorism. And you just read about what the difference is. In your own words, what is the difference? You can go ahead and answer in Pear Deck. Awesome. It looks like you all have really captured it, of the specific of colorism being what you see. Awesome. Okay. We're going to watch a quick video, and if you'd like to respond in the Pear Deck about what resonates with you most.
I remember when I first discovered what black was, and then people kept calling people black. I remember like black, oh, she's black. Like black, they're not black, they're brown. They're dark brown. That don't make no sense.
Being proud of my African roots is something that I don't take lightly, and I embrace because it's part of me.
Nosotros queremos mucho tenemos latinos unidos, pero al mismo tiempo tenemos que terminar la discriminación entre nosotros los latinos.
Estamos como estamos porque somos racistas entre nosotros mismos, entre nuestra propia gente. ¿Sabes qué? No nos apoyamos.
I always feel like I'm never Latina enough because of my skin color, because of my hair.
I would just hear my family be like, oh, don't go out with somebody that's dark skinned, que no salga con un negro, arregla la raza.
Dark skin in the Latino community isn't considered beautiful.
We've been colonized so poorly that we want to identify with being white so much, not all of us, but many of us, that we look down on dark skin.
Tú como negro latino tienes dos problemas. Primero, eres negro, se te discriminan por negro. Y segundo, eres latino, te discriminan por latino. Eso es doble negrito.
I remember when I was a kid, I looked at myself in the mirror. Yo dije, esta nariz, estos labios que tengo yo, I'm ugly. ¿Sabes que yo era? Porque yo pensaba que yo era feo.
Yo veo una compañera de trabajo que me enteré que a mi espalda se expresaba de mí como mona, la mona. ¿Sabes qué es lo más triste? Que ella era una mona. I know I always stress to my family whenever they say something like, they'll be like, Julissa, tú eres moreno. And I'm like, we are the morenos. That's us.
Your parents are instilling in you that these European features are the most beautiful. The standard of beauty for them is blonde hair and blue eyes.
I think there's some colorism just across the board because we've been taught that lighter skin is beautiful.
Light skin, fair skin is being portrayed on platforms like TV and media and all of these things. They let you know that that's what they perceive as beautiful.
And then you look on TV and the telenovelas, they don't look like that ever.
Muy seguido es que las personas dicen, ay, qué bonita eres para ser una negrita. Entonces, una persona negra no puede ser bonita.
Dark skin is beautiful and it has melanin in it and it doesn't age. We hate ourselves so much that we really don't understand how beautiful we are.
Y yo por mi color o por lo que tú crees, tú no me vas a parar, que yo voy a triunfar. En lo que yo voy a hacer, yo voy a triunfar.
Embrace the beauty that is you because most people are trying to look like you. They're going to get their hair curled, they're going to get tans, they're getting injections in their butts and in their lips. They want to look like you. So don't hate you because everybody wants to look like you.
Si había una fórmula, yo creo que ya lo habíamos arreglado, no hay ninguna fórmula. Tú como individuo tienes que enseñar a tu gente de ser orgulloso de ser lo que eres. Somos negros y tenemos que ser orgullosos de nuestra raza.
Brown and dark, and it's okay to have beautiful pigments and features like this. It is okay. It is more than okay, actually, because the world changes and moves in different rhythms, and right now, people want to look like us.
Okay, so how colorism manifests. Can I get a volunteer to read out this slide, please? Awesome, thanks, Nelson. Thank you. Go ahead and read about the language part. I'm not going to have anyone read this one out loud because of the words that it includes. So I want you to read it silently and drag your dot when you finish. All right. Thank you for that. There we go. Okay. Next part. What can we do? Learn, acknowledge media consumption and identifying risk areas and having hard conversations. You can read through those more specifically, but the biggest areas are learning, acknowledging, changing our behavior, and having those hard conversations. You can read through those more specifically, but what are you going to commit to doing? Awesome. This is huge. Making those commitments is really important. So thank you for making those commitments to what you're going to do. One of the things that stands out to me is that having the conversation with friends and family. I know that's hard, but that's a major step in doing the work as well, that external work. Awesome. Colorism in our community, I do want to address, since we are all educators. I know we're all in different places in our journey of DEI and anti-racist work. And some of you might not feel as comfortable addressing certain issues as others, but addressing colorism is important. And if you feel uncomfortable addressing it, please reach out for support and do the work to get comfortable with it. The key here is that silence condones, validates, and sustains colorism, especially in the eyes of young people, and they notice it. When we don't say anything, they notice that. Our call to action is addressing colorism in our schools. So that can look like, in the moment, addressing it as simple as, I don't condone colorism in the classroom, or that's not an appropriate comment. The key here is to acknowledge it, address it, and shut it down. You can also follow up later, make it a teachable moment, but the important part is to acknowledge it and shut it down. So how are you going to address it in your space or spaces at school? You can use one of the quotes I've given you, or if you have a different quote you'd like to use, you can write it in the Pear Deck. How will you address colorism? I love this. Addressing colorism even when it happens in another language, and calling students in to hold their own community accountable when they understand something that a teacher might not. So holding our community to high expectations. Awesome setting boundaries. I like this one as well. The only thing I would say with this one is specifically address colorism. Like, students might not know why that's not respectful or why it's harmful. Awesome. This is a key one here too, addressing the use of the N-word at school. Yes, the rationale piece. Awesome. These are some really great responses. Thank you for your reflection. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the mastery check. I'm going to drop the link to this in the chat. I just really want to stamp that this work is not optional. We must continue to learn and grow and do better, and part of that is doing that internal work, that reflection. So I want you to use this mastery check as a space to reflect, and feel free to go back and use your Pear Deck and your responses to help you finish. I'm going to put this in student pace so that you can go back and look at your answers. Make sure you complete it by the end of the day. If you'd like, it's in student pace, you can have the optional look ahead at our next session. Thank you all for your work today, and I'll see you for our next session.